Something happened to you. And then, at some point, it stopped happening. The relationship ended. You left. You survived. The diagnosis came back clear. The job changed. The person who harmed you is no longer in your life. The thing that threatened your safety, your stability, your sense of self, it's over. And yet, you still flinch. You still brace. You still wake at 3 a.m. with your heart already running. You still hold your breath in certain rooms. You still feel, in ways you can't fully articulate, that you're waiting for something to go wrong. You look at your life and you see that it's changed. You know, intellectually, that you're not in the same danger anymore. And still, your body hasn't received that message. This isn't weakness. This isn't failure. This isn't evidence that you're broken, or that healing isn't real, or that you've somehow done it wrong. This is what happens when a nervous system has been forged in fire, and no one is told that the fire is out. Today we're going to go deep into this. Not just the neuroscience of why your body holds on, but the ancestral, the somatic, the identity-level architecture of what it means to live braced for a danger that's no longer present, and what it actually takes to come home to yourself when your body has forgotten what safety feels like. Welcome to Awaken Intelligence, exploring the psychoneurology of awakening, where neuroscience, psychology, and consciousness meet. I'm Vuyiswa KMB, initiated shaman, oracle, African death and rebirth doula, and sacred blood medicine practitioner. The founder of Awaken Sanctuary for Awareness, a psychoneurological healing sanctuary on 8.5 hectares of sacred land in South Africa. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been on this journey with me for a while, I see you. I'm glad you're here. Today's audiobook is called Your Nervous System Doesn't Know the Danger is Over. Why Healing Feels Impossible Even When Your Life Has Changed. By the time we reach the end of this, you'll understand something that most people never get told. Not by therapists, not by coaches, not by wellness programs. You'll understand why your body can outlast your circumstances. Why healing your life on the outside isn't the same as healing your nervous system from the inside. Why you can think yourself better and still feel the same. And what the path back to an unbraced, unburdened, actually safe body looks like. This isn't theory. Everything I'm about to share, I've lived in my own body, including the shoulder pain that wouldn't heal, including the years I didn't know I wasn't breathing, including the slow, disorienting journey of learning that the danger was over, and my body hadn't yet received the news. Stay with me. I want to begin with my shoulder. For years, I carried a pain in my shoulder that I couldn't explain and couldn't heal. I tried everything: body work, rest, movement. I adjusted my posture. I stretched. I strengthened. Nothing resolved it. And then one day, in the middle of something completely unrelated, I became aware of what my body was actually doing. Not occasionally, not when I was stressed. Always. My shoulder was braced. Chronically, continuously, without my knowledge or instruction, braced. The muscle hadn't forgotten how to let go. It had decided, somewhere beneath my conscious awareness, that letting go wasn't safe. When I paid attention, I found more. I found a belly that was pulled in and held. Not for aesthetics, not intentionally, just held. Permanently contracted. Guarding something. I found glutes that were locked even when I was sitting still. I found teeth that were pressed together in my sleep, in meetings, in moments of silence when nothing was threatening me. And most significantly, I found that I wasn't breathing. Not the dramatic kind of not breathing. Not the visible kind that people notice. The quiet kind. The shallow, held, partial breath of someone who has learned, at a level far below language, that to fully exhale is to let your guard down. And to let your guard down is to be caught off guard. And to be caught off guard is to be in danger. I'd been breathing at about 60% capacity for years, maybe longer. This is what chronic threat does to a body. It doesn't send you a memo. It doesn't ask your permission. It simply reorganizes your physiology around the priority of survival. And it keeps those reorganizations in place long after the threat has passed. Because the threat detection system in your nervous system isn't updating based on the calendar. It's updating based on felt experience. And if the felt experience of safety has never been established in the body has no evidence to update toward. I didn't know I was braced. That's the thing I want you to hear. I'm a practitioner. I work with the nervous system. I've studied the body's response to trauma. I've guided hundreds of people through exactly this territory. And I still didn't know, because the brace had become background. It had become normal. It had become the baseline I was measuring everything else from. If you suspect, even slightly, that something like this might be true for you, stay with this audiobook. Because what I'm about to share is going to give you a map you didn't have before. If this is landing, drop a comment below. Share where you feel it in your body. You're not alone in this, and your words might be exactly what someone else needed to read today. Let's go into the neuroscience. Not to make this clinical, but because understanding the mechanism is one of the most powerful things you can do for your own healing. When you understand why your body is doing what it's doing, you stop fighting it as though it's the enemy. You start working with it as though it's the messenger. Your nervous system has one primary job: not to make you happy, not to make you productive, not to make you calm. Its primary job, the thing it's been architected over millions of years of evolution to do, is to keep you alive. It does this through a system called the autonomic nervous system, and within that system, a framework that neuroscientist Stephen Porges named the polyvagal theory. You may have heard this name, but I want to go deeper into it than most people take it. The polyvagal framework describes 3 primary states your nervous system can operate from. The first is the ventral vagal state, what most people call safety, connection, regulation. This is the state where you can think clearly, feel relationally connected, speak coherently, make decisions from wisdom rather than fear. The nervous system in this state isn't on guard. The face is open. The breath is full. The body is mobile without being mobilized for threat. The second is the sympathetic state, what most people know as the fight or flight response. Adrenaline releases. Heart rate increases. Blood moves to the limbs. The digestive system slows. The immune response downregulates. Every resource the body has is being redirected toward managing the threat. In this state, you can't access your full cognitive capacity. You can't connect in the relational, warm way that ventral vagal allows. You are, in the most precise sense, in survival mode. The third is the dorsal vagal state, sometimes called the freeze or shutdown response. When a threat is perceived as inescapable, when fight or flight isn't an option, the nervous system shifts into a different gear. Heart rate slows. The body becomes immobile. Dissociation may occur. Energy is conserved. This is the state of collapse, numbness, disconnection, the particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't respond to sleep. Here's what most people aren't told about these states. They're not choices. They're not preferences. They're not reflections of your character or your commitment to healing. They're biological responses, involuntary, automatic, extraordinarily fast, driven by a part of the nervous system that operates entirely below your conscious awareness. And critically, Once a nervous system has been conditioned to operate primarily from sympathetic or dorsal vagal states, it doesn't automatically return to ventral vagal when the threat is removed. Because the nervous system doesn't measure threat by what's happening in your life. It measures threat by what's happening in your body. This is what I mean when I say, the nervous system doesn't know the danger is over. I want to talk about what happens over time in a body that's been living in sustained threat. Not a single traumatic event, but the prolonged kind. The kind that comes from years in a home where you never knew what version of a person you'd encounter. Years in a relationship where the ground was never stable. Years of financial precarity where every month held the possibility of collapse. Years of discrimination, erasure, invisibility, or the particular exhaustion of performing safety in spaces that were never safe for you. This kind of sustained threat produces something I call the chronic brace. The chronic brace isn't a dramatic response. It's quiet. It's efficient. It's so well integrated into your daily functioning that you stop registering it as a response at all. It becomes your neutral, your normal, your baseline. It lives in the places I described in my own body: the held belly, the locked jaw, the compressed shoulder, the breath that never quite arrives at the bottom of the lungs. It lives in the hypervigilance that reads as attention to detail, in the difficulty falling asleep or the difficulty staying asleep, because sleep requires a surrender the nervous system isn't yet equipped to make. It lives in the way you scan a room when you enter it, in the way you rehearse conversations before you have them, in the way you monitor other people's emotional states as a primary survival function, because your safety once depended on knowing what mood the other person was in before they had a chance to tell you. None of this is dysfunction. I need you to hear that clearly. All of it was intelligent. Every single adaptation your body made was an appropriate response to the environment it was in. The problem, and it's not even a problem, it's a mismatch, is that your body adapted so successfully that it kept the adaptations after the environment changed. You got out. You changed your life. You did the work. You made the choices that were extraordinarily hard to make. And your body is still living in the reality it learned. In the African indigenous tradition that forms the primary framework of my work, we understand this not just as a nervous system phenomenon, but as something that operates at the level of the blood. The cellular memory that carries the lived experience of every body before yours that also learned to brace, to guard, to contract around threat. The chronic brace isn't only yours. It may be the most familiar shape your lineage knows. This isn't a weight to carry. It's a thread to follow. If you're finding this audiobook valuable, please share it. There's someone in your life right now who's living braced and doesn't yet have the language for it. This might be exactly what they need to hear. There's something that sits beneath the nervous system physiology that I rarely hear spoken about. And it's this. The danger didn't only change your nervous system. It became part of your identity. When you've lived in sustained threat long enough, you don't just develop a braced nervous system. You develop a self, a complete, coherent, functional self that was built to navigate that threat. And that self has an identity. It has a name, even if you've never spoken it aloud. The person who always knows where the exits are. The person who can read a room in seconds. The person who never asks for too much, because asking for too much was once dangerous. The person who manages everyone else's emotions so that their own emotional state doesn't become collateral damage. The person who's never caught off guard, because being caught off guard has cost them before. This isn't your true self, but it is a self, and it's extraordinarily competent, and it's kept you alive. And here's the thing that makes healing complicated. particularly the kind of healing that sits at the level of the nervous system. This identity isn't just a coping mechanism. Over time, it becomes the story you tell about who you are. I'm someone who can handle anything. I'm resilient. I don't need much. I'm fine. I'm always fine. And releasing that identity, releasing the person in danger that your body has been, requires something that most healing frameworks don't address. Because you can't release an identity through logic alone. You can't think yourself out of a self that your nervous system built as a survival architecture. You have to feel your way out. You have to let the body lead. In my own journey, this was one of the most disorienting territories I traversed, because I'd been so good at being the person in danger. So effective, so capable. The brace had made me functional in circumstances that should have broken me. And when the danger began to lift, there was something that felt like loss. Not the loss of the difficulty, the loss of the version of myself that difficulty had made. Who am I when there's nothing to survive? That isn't an abstract question. It's one of the most important questions a person coming out of sustained threat can ask themselves. I want to address something that comes up constantly in my work and probably in yours. The belief that understanding the problem is the same as healing it. Many of us, particularly those who are neurodivergent, highly intelligent, or who've done years of psychological work, have become extraordinarily skilled at understanding our patterns. We can describe our trauma responses in precise terms. We can trace the lineage of a trigger back through our history. We know the model, and then we lie awake at night, with our jaw clenched and our heart running, and we can't understand why the understanding isn't enough. Here's why. The part of your brain that stores traumatic memory and drives threat response isn't the same part that processes language and narrative. The prefrontal cortex, the part that does your thinking, your analyzing, your elegant psychological insight, is downstream from the structures that are running the survival response. You can't talk your way past the amygdala. You can't reason with the brainstem. The healing that reaches the nervous system is somatic. It's relational. It's ancestral. It's ceremonial in the deepest sense. It requires the body to be present in a held, witness space where safety isn't just declared, but actually experienced. So what does it actually look like to begin to unbrace? I want to be honest with you here. It's not a linear process. It doesn't follow a clean narrative arc where you do the work, and then you're healed, and the shoulder pain resolves, and you breathe deeply, and everything is different. That's not what happens. What happens is more like this. First, you become aware. Not as a project, not as a practice you schedule, but as a shift in attention. You begin to notice what your body is actually doing beneath your daily functioning. You notice the held breath. You notice the clenched jaw. You notice the way your belly contracts when you hear a certain kind of silence. You notice the scan, the constant, low-grade scan of the environment for threat data. This noticing isn't small. For many people, this is the first time they've inhabited their body consciously since the threat began. And for bodies that have been in chronic brace, being noticed, being attended to, can itself produce a response. Grief, sometimes, or anger, or the particular kind of exhaustion that arrives when you've been holding something for so long that simply acknowledging you were holding it requires you to put it down. Second, you begin to interrupt the pattern, not aggressively, not with force, with curiosity. When you notice the brace, you don't try to immediately release it. You ask, what does this brace know? What is it protecting? What's the story it's holding? This is where the work becomes ancestral in my framework. Because the brace is often not only about what happened to you, it's about what happened to the bodies before you that also learned to contract around threat. your grandmother's brace, your mother's held breath, the contracted belly of a lineage that learned, through colonial violence, through displacement, through sustained rupture of safety, that the world isn't safe and the body must be kept ready. To unbrace isn't just to release your own holding. It's to become the first body in your lineage that was permitted to exhale fully. Third, you practice safety. Not just think about it. Practice it. This means creating conditions deliberately, repeatedly, in which the body can begin to register felt safety, not performed safety. The safety of a regulated nervous system meeting another regulated nervous system, of a breath that's witnessed, of a body that's held, not managed. Fourth, and this is the one that takes the longest, you begin to release the identity of the person in danger. This isn't something that happens through a single ceremony, a single intensive, a single revelation. It happens through the accumulation of experiences in which the survival self is no longer needed, and the body begins, slowly, suspiciously, then with increasing trust, to recognize that. I began to learn that my shoulder wasn't storing dysfunction. It was storing readiness. It was keeping me ready for the next threat. And as the threat, the actual, sustained threat of my life, began to lift, I had to teach my shoulder that readiness was no longer the first requirement, that it was allowed to rest, that rest wasn't danger. When you turn toward it with curiosity, something begins to shift, and the body, when it feels its intelligence is being honored, begins to trust. Your nervous system needs you to take the question of identity seriously. Who are you when you're not the person surviving? That self isn't built. It's revealed. You're not broken. You're braced. And braced things can release when they're given the conditions they actually need. I want to leave you with this. Your body told the truth for years about what it was experiencing, when no one else believed you, when you were called difficult, dramatic, sensitive, too much, when the evidence of what was happening was invisible to everyone around you. Your body knew. Your body held the record. Your body braced and held and kept going because you needed it to. And now, if you're here, listening to this, doing this work, your body is still telling the truth. It's telling the truth about what it still carries, about what still needs to be witnessed and released and returned to the earth. This isn't a sign that you're failing at healing. This is the healing. This is the body finally being given permission to be heard. The danger doesn't pass through the mind. It passes through the body. And the body passes it through slowly, carefully, with great intelligence, when it's given a container worthy of what it's been holding. You're not too late. You're not too far gone. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, standing at the threshold between the self that survived and the self that's allowed to live. I'm Vuyiswa KMB, and I'll see you in the next audiobook.